Hello, everyone, and welcome to Top Secret. Yes, where we talk all about insider threats and intelligence. So today's discussion is going to be somewhat different. We've got my co-host Sean Free, and we've got a special guest, Mo Koo from DTEX Systems. Welcome, my friend. So before we dive into the key of the message that we want to talk to regarding predictions, what we want to start off with is if we go and step a few steps backwards. Mo, can you give us a little bit of a background of who you are, what is DTEX all about, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me, Boaz, Sean. Great to be here with you guys. My name is Mo. I'm one of the founders and I'm the CTO for DTEX Systems. It's a company we founded here in Adelaide, in Australia, many years ago. At a time when it was very difficult to be a startup company in Australia, in the tech space, and so we pretty quickly moved the company to London, and that's kind of where we really grew it. And our focus was always right from the beginning, being able to provide a completely different data set. We were starting to see, even back then, the early security operations centers and the early security operations teams was struggling with too much noisy data to try and make decisions, with either risk-based decisions or decisions around security and how to protect their organizations. And so we realized early on that we needed to develop a different type of data set, which was clean at source, eliminates the noise, and then therefore you don't have to rely on the buzzwords of today, like artificial intelligence and machine learning. If you've got the right data, if it's clean and if it's well structured, then that's at least 70% of the battle, because you should be able to deliver most of the use cases that a security team needs with basic statistical analysis, if you've got the right data to start off with. And I think there's a lot of organizations out there. You might have seen the news about our new partnership with Splunk come out today, where everyone's starting to realize that garbage in, garbage out story, right? Which
Oh,
is
yes,
fairly logical, but
correct.
it's taken the industry a very long time to realize that you can't take crappy data and then put it in some whiz bang engine and get gold out the other side.
Uh, Totally correct.
Doesn't make sense from a physical perspective, right? So,
Correct.
well, anyway, we spent a lot of time in London, and so because of our background in Europe, we've taken quite a different approach to most other security vendors, in that privacy has always been a big part of what we do and what we have to be sensitive to. So we've always kind of, it's a bit of a passion of mine, where you get, security and privacy, where you get the overlap between security and privacy. That intersection is actually where you get safety. And so early on, we kind of developed this notion that actually cybersecurity is really should always be seen as just an extension of occupational health and safety, right? It's no different, right?
Interesting.
And
Yes.
if you see it that way, and you respect your employees, you treat them with respect, and you're protecting their well-being while also protecting the company, then you're going to get the most engaged workforce. And if you have an engaged workforce, that's a loyal workforce, then from an insider threat perspective, you're kind of conditioning everyone to be, on the same page, and looking after each other, and looking after the business, looking after the shareholders, looking after the customers. And really, that's where you're going to get the best results from an enterprise security perspective. And so we were in London for many years, and we kind of grew the business there. But then in 2013, for those folks that kind of have been around cybersecurity for that kind of time, will remember when a company called Mandiant, who was the kind of the,
Yep.
always recognized as the early, first responders that you pull in if you've had a breach or if you suspect a breach. And, Mandiant's
Correct.
the one that gets the call first. So Mandiant and FireEye merged together in the US, and then they went IPO in late 2013. And when they did that, it was the biggest IPO of all time in cybersecurity. And the Series A, B, and C investors in FireEye exited that business, and they reached out to us in London, and they said, we think that the next wave in cybersecurity is going to be around moving from treating the symptoms to identifying the root cause and treating the root cause to change inherently how cybersecurity is done, from a behavior perspective. So
Yep.
understanding the human behavior that is the root cause to bad things happening, whether that be outside infiltrators managing to get into the network, or insiders, whether they be malicious leaking stuff out, or accidentally leaking stuff out, or accidentally compromising systems. There's always an underlying human behavior that's the root cause. And so in 2014, we moved the headquarters to Silicon Valley, and those investors jumped on board with us. So we have a lot of the original pre-IPO FireEye DNA around our board table. So 4 of the original 6 FireEye board members, and our CEO Barman Marbod was one of the key founding engineers at FireEye. And so we've always been a very product-focused organization rather than a sales-focused organization. And that's why we decided to bring in Barman as our CEO, because prior to FireEye, he was on the founding team for FaceTime Communications, which was then acquired by Apple. So always heavily product focused, and always focused on the user experience and the customer experience. And so, that's the history. And then in 2018, well, actually 2016 was the when I first met the very first cybersecurity minister for Australia, Minister Dan Tehan. And it was an interesting encounter because he called me up in California. His office called me up and asked me to come and have a meeting with Minister Tehan. And when I sat down with him, he said, "Well, the reason I'm reaching out to you is because we really need to build the industry, cybersecurity industry in Australia, and we need to build the capability, but we need to stop people like you." And I said,
Ah,
"Minister, I don't understand what
yes.
you mean, stop people like me." He said, "Well, the ones that actually make a success of it in cybersecurity, they leave, and they take all the IP with them, and they take all their best people with them, and you've done exactly that. Why? Like, and how do we stop people like you from doing that in the future?" And that's when I
You
said,
tell
I
him about
put
the
it,
root cause.
yeah, well, I put it back on him, and I said, well, I mean,
Exactly.
if we had in Australia a much more mature um,
Yes.
capital structure and capital economy to build around the entrepreneur, maybe I wouldn't have had to leave to go and find the money. If we
Correct.
had customers, enterprise and government customers that would be more open to helping Australian startup companies, to test their products and try their products and help shape their products, then why would I leave in the first place? I never wanted to leave Australia. I was forced to leave because no one would support me in the mission that I was on, with
Yep.
such a big
Yep.
vision, to do something that's very different. If we don't have that support infrastructure and the mindset of the Australian organizations, and the economy and the ecosystem around the entrepreneur doesn't exist, we have to go. And that's been
Correct.
happening for several years. And he said, well, that's very interesting. And so we started a dialogue at that point, and it was then that he introduced me to Stephen Marshall, who was then he was the opposition leader in South Australia. And I engaged with him. We did a few interesting cybersecurity projects and things, and I went back to the US. And then in 2018, when Premier Marshall came into office, it was interesting. He called me up and he said, "Look, would you come to my house for dinner? I would like to introduce you to some people." I was in California. So I said, "Of course, I'll be there." So I got on a plane, came back home, and he introduced me to 6 other entrepreneurs, all from very different backgrounds. One from the space industry, one from the telecommunications industry, one from the media and television industry. And it was really interesting, because he said, "Look, what we're going to do here in South Australia," and for those of you who aren't familiar with South Australia, the economy here suffered for many, many years after the Holden factory shut down. So we were
Yeah.
heavily dependent upon motor manufacturing or auto manufacturing here to drive the economy. And when that shut down, lots of people lost their jobs. And we had the highest unemployment rate in the country for many, many years. And so when Premier Marshall came in, he said to us, what I want to do is I want to transform the South Australian economy, and we're going to do that through entrepreneurship. And so I would like you, the entrepreneurs, to tell me how we can transform it through entrepreneurship. So we actually formed a board. That right there and then that day, he cooked us a 3-course meal by himself with no help, and
Brilliant.
allowed us to help ourselves to his cellar, which is a very nice cellar. And we proceeded to discuss the topic of entrepreneurship and how we would build an ecosystem around Australian entrepreneurs, and particularly South Australian entrepreneurs, to help them kind of flourish here. And we set about setting up the office of the chief entrepreneur. We appointed a chief entrepreneur, the first ever in South Australia, and the first 3 pillars that we were focused on was defense, space, and cyber. And so that's been a really interesting journey over the last couple of years, because, I think the landscape now, what we have here in Australia, is very different to when I started the company. We have a supporting infrastructure. We have companies that are willing to invest behind Australian innovations. We are competing on a global scale, and people are starting to realize that. Our venture capital here is still quite young, but it's maturing quickly.
Yes.
We can do more to accelerate that maturity, but I think we've got a really good opportunity now, not just in cybersecurity, but in tech in general and entrepreneurship in general. So it's an exciting time to be home.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mel. That's great introduction. I think what I find interesting is when you mentioned that the guys from Mandate and FireEye sort of approached you to look at the problem from the root cause. But has the industry changed? Have the thinking changed, or they're still looking at symptoms today?
So the industry broadly, Boaz, is still addressing symptoms today, but I think it's changing, and it's changing from the top down. And what I mean by top down is, typically change in technology kind of goes around the globe in a specific way. By and large, and I'm generalizing, but by and large, this is the rule, right? Like, a lot of technology change gets invented on the west coast of the US, right? Silicon Valley is the heart of where a lot of that innovation and, that disruption occurs. And then it takes sort of maybe 12 to 18 months, maybe 24 months to make its way across the US to the East Coast, to New York, and, past Austin, and, now DC, the DC Beltway. There's a lot of innovation that happens there too, but it kind of has generally worked its way around there. Then it makes its way around the globe to Europe, and then it slowly filters down through Asia Pacific and down to Australia. So typically, over the last 20 years or so, Australia has been kind of an adopter of technologies sort of at least 3 years behind where it's invented in the West Coast. By and large, again, generalization, but by and large, that's the case.
Yes.
What we're seeing is the shift in cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is changing so much and everyone's getting hit so badly in the same way right across the globe, that down here now, that curve of adoption, particularly in cybersecurity, instead of just following the trend and slowly being behind that curve of how it flows around the globe, we're now starting to accelerate and jump ahead to be on par with where everyone else is. And that's exciting for Australia. And I think COVID has helped with that as well, because it levels the geographic playing field and enables Australia to be on that level playing field. Whereas before, we were so far removed from the bigger markets like the US and Europe, it was always hard for us to compete or to be at that level. Whereas now that playing field's leveled, obviously you have to be prepared to wake up early, like I do, very early, and start your day on those time zones. But if you're prepared to do that, then you can compete on that level playing field. And I think in cybersecurity, what we're seeing happen right now is a lot of consolidation, because no longer can enterprise organizations continue to deploy point solutions to solve point problems. It's too hard to manage. It's too hard to operate. At the same time, we've learned our lessons from the likes of Symantec and McAfee, where, no one's thinking today that they can have one cybersecurity vendor that they can rely on for everything. I've been starting to hear a lot more that Microsoft is being relied on heavily for a lot of different security things. And,
Because it's
you know,
easy.
well, it's easy and it's cheaper,
Correct.
and it's aligned with the CIO and what he's trying to achieve from a cost saving
Correct.
perspective and from an
Correct.
operational perspective. And I get that, and I definitely think Microsoft has come leaps and bounds ahead from where they were from a security standpoint. But really, that's just the foundational parts of security, right? Absolutely, you should be having Microsoft security stuff. That's belt and braces. That's table stakes. You have to
Correct.
absolutely have those baseline things in place.
You got
But
it.
to say that Microsoft is my cybersecurity strategy, that's a failed strategy, right? You have to
I
then
would agree.
you build that foundation, you make sure you have
Correct.
all those building blocks in place, and then you add on top of that, the best of breed solution stack that you need, but not point solution solving point problems, more those solutions that work well together seamlessly. And so you look at the end-to-end stack that you have and build appropriately. And that's what we're seeing as the shift, where those organizations that have been doing this for a while and consolidating for a while are starting to get to that point now where they can say, yes, we're not just addressing symptoms after the fact. We're now addressing root cause ahead of time. We call it left of boom, to use a US military term,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Because
Better.
because you have to be, otherwise, if you're after the fact saying, okay, the horse is bolted, here's how it bolted, and here's how it here's who was responsible for opening the stable door. That's one thing. You know, 3 years ago, we were very focused on moving from after the fact to real time. Hey, the horse is bolting. That's too late as well. Like, to be able to
Correct.
stick your hand up and say that the horse is bolting, it's going out the stable door now. It's gone before you get there, right? No
Correct.
matter how quickly you react to that. So today, it's really all about being predictive. So understanding what the root cause behaviors are that lead to bad things, detecting those root cause behaviors, and being
Yes.
able to then decide left of boom, how do we want to respond before the breach happens? How do we want to respond before a data leak happens? How do we want to respond before a bit of malware gets dumped on that machine? Because if CrowdStrike stands up and says, hey, you got malware here, okay, great. If they can contain that and restrict that, perfect. But why did it get there in the first place? Right? That's the big question. Why did we allow that piece of malware to execute on that device? Right?
Mm.
Something allowed it to get in there. Some vulnerability, and it's usually a human vulnerability. It's usually
Yeah.
somebody either being targeted or victimized or making a stupid mistake, and that's how it all becomes.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Something that
Exactly.
no organizations don't want to talk about, right? It's like a Pandora box sits in the corner of the office in the room and for in the organization, and they know it's there, but they're afraid to open it because they scared to deal with the consequences or don't have the skills to understand how to mitigate that problem. And he mentioned that that's the human factor. So when you talk about all these horses that run out the stable, or let's talk about bullets, the industry is so saturated by a lot of different products and solutions that provide different shields and protections against huge amount of different types of bullets. But do organization ask or refer to who is actually shooting these bullets and how to deal with the finger that pulled the trigger instead of how to protect against these bullets? Because once the bullet left the gun, there was some intention or there was some root problem that actually started that, right? So why and this is what Boaz and this is what I guess we see a lot in the industry and in the market. A lot of organizations deal with the problems and the symptoms and try to shut down and kill fires, but they don't really focus on the actual root cause
Mm-hmm.
and target the problem. And when it comes, we always say there is no risk without people. If the risk starts with people, why organizations scare or don't do enough to look at people?
Yeah, and it's a good question, and I think there's a few different factors there, right? It's easier to focus on machines and data related problems than it is to focus on people problems, because it's a much more difficult problem to handle. So let me give you an example, right? So everybody in cybersecurity is very well aware of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right? And if you talk to every single cybersecurity practitioner out there, they understand MITRE ATT&CK framework because, it was published as an open source guide to the tactics, techniques, and practices that adversaries use against enterprise organizations when they want to hack or target or whatever they do. Very powerful framework, so powerful that actually most of the EDR vendors or the AV vendors use MITRE ATT&CK as part of the core principles of how they develop their product and how they kind of respond and detect things, and they use those attack TTPs to define that. But MITRE themselves realized 2 years ago that the attack framework is not suitable for detecting insider threats and human behaviors, because human behaviors are so difficult to map to. You have to literally understand behavioral science and the things, the motivations behind humans that make them do stupid things, silly things, bad things, evil things, right? And there's so many different factors that you have to pull in. So long story short, MITRE is creating a new framework called the Insider Threat Framework. We're working very closely with them on that right now. And what they're trying to do and how we're helping them is to try and get more data. And this has been the biggest problem, is that organizations have not been open to sharing insider threat related incidents and data, even with a trusted organization like MITRE. And this is the problem for Gartner and Forrester and all the analysts, right? Because I think we were approached by, let's just use Gartner for example, right? We were approached by Gartner maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even longer actually. And they were saying, look, we think insider threat is going to be a big topic, right? But we can't get enough data. Everyone tells us it's a problem, and
Correct.
it's a big worry for them, but they won't give us any background information to help us build a, what do you
Design
call it,
first.
the magic quadrant for insider threat. So we don't know what to do, because we know it's a problem. Everyone tells us a
Yes.
problem, but no one will
Yes.
help us. So we can't build a framework, we can't build a quadrant. And after a year or so of trying to figure that out, they eventually dropped it and said, don't worry about insider threat. That's when user behavior analytics was born, and this whole thing of
Yes.
VBA
Yeah.
was born, which ultimately failed, right? But it goes back to that point that people are not, A, they don't understand the behavioral problem well enough, and B, they're not prepared to share because they're worried about what people might think. If I don't have control of my own people, what is that saying about me, right? But that's the wrong approach, because we are human, and
Correct.
humans just do human things, right? Um, and that's why for us, like, we try to focus on that workforce engagement. Engaging your workforce, making them feel trusted, respected, and protected. Because if they feel trusted, respected, and protected, they will reciprocate, and they will
Correct.
be loyal to
Correct.
the organization, its shareholders, and its customers, and they will do the
Corporate.
right thing
Yeah.
inherently, right? And that's why MITRE asked for help as well, to get some data from our customers, to be able to give them real data so they can build that insider threat framework, which is what's happening right now. And we have recently launched a very special partnership with them called Inside R Protect, which is focused on inside risk and insider risk management programs, and helping particularly critical infrastructure organizations to accelerate the maturity of how they deal with insider risk. And taking a data-driven approach to doing that. But you first have to come at it from a behavioral science perspective. You cannot come at it from a cybersecurity perspective. It's a people problem. It's a behavioral science problem, and you must overlay that behavioral science approach to any kind of detection, protection, remediation around that type of threat. Hopefully that answers your question. It was a bit of a long-winded way around it.
No,
It's
that's
easy to identify. It's easy to identify risky assets, computer servers, processes, and applications. Easy. It's there. You know how to protect it. It's either white or black. White, protected or not protected, works or failing. When it comes to people, people are dynamic. They change every second. And one day a person is good, one day a person is bad, and due to different circumstances. So we can't really when we look at dogs, when they wave their tail, we know when they're happy or sad. It's easy. We see indicators when we look at babies, which when they don't talk. We look at their actions and we extract or we understand or from their actions we assume different behaviors and we assume what's happening to them. For grown-ups like us or for employees, it's difficult. We wish that every employee could wear maybe that in the future wearable technology like a watch that will. Yeah, you love Boaz because we talked
yes.
about it. It's quite scary, but that's makes a lot of sense. Imagine that every organization provides a wearable watch to every employee every morning that it monitors their heartbeats and blood pressure and some other metrics that can indicate behaviors like stress, anger,
Yeah, I get
and
very
And
etc.
nervous. I get very
privacy.
nervous talking
Yeah.
about that
Of
point,
course.
Sean. And it gets me back to the original approach that we've tried to take at our company, which is everything is privacy by design, right? And that kind of approach, if we end up in that way, you're going to be driving the worst kind of insider threats. Why? Because when people are pissed off and they don't feel trusted and they don't feel respected, they find very clever, very difficult ways to detect, very clever ways of circumventing. And then it's not
Mhm.
just about them trying to make additional money like most cybercrime is today. Then it becomes disgruntled. Then it becomes really, truly malicious to try and do harm. And those are the worst kind of insiders. And so that approach, that draconian approach, and there are many vendors out there that are taking that approach, and many companies that are adopting those products and taking that
Yep.
kind of approach. That's a very short sighted approach that is going to destroy their business because your people are either your greatest asset or your biggest liability. And when you treat them like
Correct.
that, you can only end up in one way.
Correct.
And we've
And
seen
I
we've
guess
seen it
that's the
happen.
fear of a lot of that's the fear of a lot of organizations to say, hey, what's the balance? Where is the fine line between understanding our biggest asset, who that might be our biggest risk, and still
Hmm.
respect their privacy and treat them as human beings. And we talk about positive incentives. Now, we
Yep.
always say that organization already gets a lot of different metrics from a lot of different systems in the organization that refers to people. So people are monitored all the time, and you can infer behaviors from different using different data sources. The login time, the boom gate, the when they swipe their card, when they go to make their coffee, or how many print they print every day. But so organization, and you talked about SIEM products in the past. They used to gather a lot of information, and you try to get golden nuggets from a pile of trash, right?
Mm.
That's what happens. So that's why the new approach of getting or organization already getting data from people in different, but it's the not right language. It doesn't really give them much. What's the best approach? And I guess this is what you provide, is to get the right data from people that actually we organization can encourage them. It's not just coming from a negative perspective, but how to encourage people to do the right thing. In order to encourage them to do the right thing, we need to learn their behavior and understand what they do wrong. In most cases, maybe it's these are human errors or negligence. We're not talking only about, a lot of security or vendors in the industry talks about, when they talk about security, they talk about malicious and hackers and bad stuff. Most of the population are good. Most employees are assumed to be good, otherwise they wouldn't be employees, right? You can't
Hmm.
really uh, not trusting your employees. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hiring them. So, what is the right approach that you actually take to balance it in one hand to get these indicators of compromise so we can predict, on the other hand to encourage people to be more engaged and to be more cooperative so they can help the organization to grow.
Yeah, so very quickly, we don't use indicators of compromise in what we do. We use indicators of intent. So
Yep.
intent is the most important thing for our business because we want to quite quickly differentiate between an actor that's malicious, intentionally doing something bad, which is less than 2% of the findings. When you do see someone who has malicious intent, you want to have the evidence, and sometimes you need to follow let them do what they are going to do so that you have the evidence to not just say, hey, you're doing something bad, but to actually bring in law enforcement, prosecute, and actually take it all the way through the courts. But that's, like I said, it's less than 2% of the time that's going on. For the rest of the time, you want to understand the intent as well. And, when you're talking about non-malicious mistakes that people make, negligence, it's not just negligence, right? Sometimes we do negligent things. Sometimes we're coerced to do things.
Mhm. Yep.
Sometimes we're duped into doing it, like without even knowing that we're doing something wrong, and it's not even our own intention, but someone fooled us into doing something stupid, right? So actually being able to differentiate between those different layers of intent is really important. Because when you know somebody's intent, then you know how to work with them to change their behavior. So, for example, we know by and large, when you see someone do something malicious, as in they know they're breaking the rules and they do it anyway, those types of individuals generally cannot be trained to change that behavior. They will eventually go
Right.
and do something like that again. So for
Correct.
us, what we know for our customers is when we see that, capture the evidence, prosecute, remove them from the business, get them out of your business. That's that side of things. When it comes to the intent of things that people are doing that is not with malicious intent, then it's important to understand the context of how they got there and why they made that mistake and how common is that mistake that they made across our entire employee population. Because if it's a very common mistake, then we should be able to get huge gains from a risk perspective and reducing the risk for the entire organization by doing a very
Correct.
simple message to our entire employee population. Say, hey guys,
Got it.
we've seen this has
Yep.
been happening, and here's what the result is of when that happens. And we know you don't intend to do that because we can see the context. This is not something you intended to do. It's just a mistake.
Yep.
But we're all making it. And
Correct.
therefore,
Correct.
the chance of a breach happening because we're all making that same mistake is huge. Please, let's stop. Let's do it this way. And when you train people that way, we call it teachable moments. When you use those teachable moments to teach people that way on a very pointed issue, it sinks in much better than trying to force people to sit in front of computer-based training and click through the
Correct.
damn slideshow, right?
Absolutely.
And say,
Yeah.
ah, I get it, I get it, I get it.
Because,
No one registers that.
because exactly, because no one cares. If you can't bridge between awareness to being caring, why would they approach it in a positive manner? Look, guys, I just want to bring to the crux of the conversation, which is about prediction. So the normal industry approach, when you talk about technology, for example, is about prevention, detection, and response. But we don't get prediction. How do we be able to know what's going to happen down the track, and what can we do about it? And very little is done about deterrence. So Mo, I just want to get your thoughts about prediction, because you're basing a lot about that, and that would be great to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, sure. So when we first started the company, it was about producing a very clean data set that enables you to have the audit trail, continuous audit trail, so that when something bad does happen, you immediately can answer who did what, where, and when, and how did it happen, right? That was the initial thing. Then it was being real time, and again, Too late to say the horse is bolting. Today it's about being predictive, right? To be able to be left of boom, to say, we saw A happen, we saw B happen. We know the statistics is telling us that if A and B have happened within this time frame in these conditions, that the very next thing to happen is either C or D. So let's make a decision how we want to respond at B and not wait until C or D happens, because we might want C to happen as the next thing, but we want to let that happen in a controlled way that we can control the outcome. But we might want to stop C and D happening entirely. That might be too scary for us. Let's cut it off at B plus
Correct.
or B.2, right? And so
Yeah.
that's the idea of prediction. And what we're doing, I'll give you an example. So I mentioned MITRE is building this insider threat framework. So we took a version of the Lockheed Martin kill chain, and we've called it the insider threat kill chain. And so what that's about is understanding how we can see and detect different types of behavior that leads to something bad happening, like a data exfiltration. Let's just take a data exfiltration, for example, right? A number of things happen before that exfiltration, if it's a malicious exfiltration, if it's a data theft incident, right, which most organizations want to detect and stop, then those traditional DLPs just don't work. Everyone knows that nowadays.
Correct.
But what we need to
Correct.
know is the steps that an individual will take leading up to the exfiltration. So we look at things like reconnaissance. How do they search for the data before they steal it? How do they get ready to steal it? Do they obfuscate their tracks? Do they try and cover their tracks after they found what they're looking for and made copies of it? What do they do there, right? We look at aggregation. Are they pulling data from multiple different areas on the network, or file shares or cloud shares or whatever the hell it may be? And are they aggregating it somewhere, whether that be on a server somewhere or on their local hard drive? And then, what are those different steps that they take before the exfiltration occurs? And if we can piece together that audit trail and go, oh, we've seen this reconnaissance activity followed by this obfuscation, and we've seen this, we absolutely know they're going to try and exfil it. And they could do it
That,
by a bunch of different ways. They could print it, they
Correct.
could send it out by Dropbox, they could email
that's
it to
the
themselves.
preparation phase.
That's the
Preparation phase.
preparation phase.
Nobody actually.
Yeah.
No
And
solution is there. The preparation
yeah,
phase.
and that's the point, right? Is because, why did UBA fail? Right? Because they were solely relying on anomaly detection. And anomaly detection is never going to be successful in isolation, because humans by nature are anomalous beings. Like, we do unusual, stupid, weird, crazy things all the time, right? And that doesn't mean something's bad just because an unusual thing happened, right? But
Correct.
when you string a series of behaviors together within a specific time period, then you can start to drive up the likelihood that you are looking at something that's important that requires your attention. And you don't do it by just focusing on anomaly. Like, and this is where, without getting too much into the weeds, we do alert stacking and risk behavior scoring, right? So anytime we see an anomaly, we don't alert anybody, we just assign it with a risk score in the system. Anytime we see a bad behavior that's a known bad behavior, whether it be reconnaissance or obfuscation or whatever,
Yep.
we assign
Yep.
it with a risk score. And then we add those risk scores together to be an additive risk score. When it hits a threshold, then you pass that information to a human being and say, here's the evidence. This is really bad. A's happened, B has happened, C has happened. The next thing that might happen is D and E. Likelihood is 60% D, 70% E. What do you want to do at C, right? That's where this gets to. Hopefully that answers the question.
Sean, you were going to ask a question.
No, I'm fascinated. Look, it's that approach of a mechanism that actually work for you, deal with all the stuff that is unseen. It's very easy to identify, and that's why a lot of organizations spend their fortune and the best of dollars just on a lot of products and systems, because they know what to protect. They know their systems very well, but they don't know their people. And the funny part is that their people could cause most of the problems. And so how and when we see it a lot in the recent years that organizations start to understand that the human risk is a problem, but still they don't have qualified the right qualifications to deal with that. And that brings me to maybe it's
Well, they
not the
don't.
question for that session, but where is HR in all these
Correct.
story in that story
Very good question.
Well,
when we
I mean,
talk about
yeah, that's a really good point, right? And if you've got the right data and you're able to present it in the right way, right, you don't have to rely on data analysts anymore, right? Those data analysts, the SOC analyst, let's just call them a SOC analyst, right? That
yep
traditionally the SOC analyst is a data analyst. Why? Because they're constantly spending their time searching through data to piece together the evidence packet to have the confidence to escalate something to the business. So they're
Correct.
spending 90% of their time in data trying to piece together the puzzle. That's what a SOC analyst is today, right?
Because it's
What we
very
need to do is to turn the SOC analyst and elevate them upwards into being a
correct.
business analyst. SOC analysts should be business analysts, not data analysts. Because if the systems are doing the right thing and we're relying on the right data, which is clean and not filled with garbage, then
Yep.
when we give the alert to the SOC analyst, right, it comes pre-packaged with everything they need to have confidence to escalate to the business. And therefore, they become a business analyst because now they have to go, okay, this is the situation. It's very clear. Do I need to go and talk to the CEO? Do I need to talk to a line manager? Do I need to talk to HR? Do I need to talk to legal and compliance? Do I need to talk to risk? Or do I need to call the police? Right? And that's literally what a modern SOC analyst should be, is a business analyst, not a data analyst. And so that's what
Because
we're
yeah
trying to do is to give the SOC teams that ability to be much more valuable to the organization, not just
correct.
diving down into that. Hey, somebody told me something might be happening over there. Go and find out, whether they're right or not. I mean, seriously? No,
mm,
it should be the SOC team saying, we know we've got a problem over there. The data's telling us this. We need to escalate now. I think this is a cause for legal concern. Or this needs to be escalated now. This is the 100th time in the last 2 hours that we've seen somebody make this same mistake. Please go and tell HR we need to run a training campaign around this today. And it's as simple as sending an email blast from the CEO to everybody in the organization to say, hey, we've seen this. Please stop because this is going to be the result. We do not want to be on the front page of the paper today. Please.
yep
Simple, right? And
Correct.
that's what a SOC analyst should be, the center of the heartbeat of the company, to be able to say, we know if the company's going to have a very bad day and we're going to stop that very bad day from happening. Not like getting the business to ask us stupid questions after the fact or because someone has a hunch. I don't like that guy. He makes me nervous. Go and see what he's doing. He must
yes
be doing
exactly
something bad. I mean,
correct.
that's
So
like
this is exactly what
1990s.
that session is all about. Obviously, we are not fortune tellers, but we do have some kind of a crystal ball that can tell us. Well, it's like involving a time machine with a future prediction. So we do have a time machine here, right? So something that can tell us what happened, what's happening now, and what could happen in the future. This is what you are actually describing. This is something that's very it's actually advanced thinking to a lot of that we can actually suggest to a lot of organizations that they desperately need it. Either they don't know it exists or they don't know how to use it.
Well, I would take it the other way around, Sean. To me, it's logical thinking. And the problem is, over the last 20 years, cybersecurity, maybe it's the fault of the vendors, right? They want it to seem like they're the smartest guys in the room, so they invent a language called cybersecurity to make
Yeah,
everyone else feel like they don't understand. But actually, today, to be successful, we have to strip that back and actually just use logic, right? And just be
only
engaging
common
with
sense.
people, right? Common
Correct.
sense,
Correct.
occupational health and safety, right? Cybersecurity is just another type of business risk. That's all it is. And if we start talking about it as business risk, then it's super easy to translate that to the CEO, to the board of directors, to our shareholders. Even if, my mum and dad are shareholders of certain companies that they've bought shares in, right? If we talk to them like this, it's easy for them to understand. If we use stupid words and language and cybersecurity, this and that, no one understands and they feel stupid and they don't want to engage in the conversation. Guess who loses? We all lose.
We all. So
Right.
the industry is built on jargon, in short.
Mm-hmm.
Look, gents, I want to wrap it up. So I want to ask you one more question there, Mo. Just give us sort of a background of what DTEX today does. I mean, obviously, in the conversation you've expressed it, but just more succinct, and how can viewers who are watching this can get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of ways to get in contact with us, and obviously through yourselves is a good is a good way to get in touch with us. But look, you'll find a lot of stuff about DTEX out there, and more we're starting to become recognized as, the data source that's clean and more intelligent than just data that you suck in. And the problem is that everyone has kind of built this big data lake and then they've stuffed it into Splunk or some other data aggregation platform and said, the more data, the better. The more data we have, the better we can answer things. And it's the wrong approach, right? You just need to ask the use cases. What use cases are we trying to solve, and what's the minimum amount of data can we solve it with? And that's really what DTEX is. We bring a completely different set of telemetry to the table. It's a complete audit trail. It doesn't drop any packets. It's got everything there in the data. It's continuous. So you don't have to, it's not trigger based. You don't have to point and shoot it anywhere. It's everywhere. It's collecting that audit trail without invading staff privacy even for a second. So in a lot of cases for the SOC team, we're removing a lot of that intrusive data that they have been capturing and replacing it with a very high signal to noise ratio set of telemetry that doesn't invade any staff privacy, but answers all the context rich questions that they've been trying to ask their big noisy data sets for many years and not being able to do. That's really what we do.
Excellent, excellent. Last comments there, Sean?
Look, I love the idea. Look, we think that starting, hitting that risk from the root, that's the right way. I think, many organizations work cybersecurity today as onion layers. They start from outside and starting to get in. So we are getting closer and closer now to understand the human risk element. Look, I'm conscious of time, so I just wanted to thank you. I'm sure that's not the last conversation we will have, because we need to have more session to talk about who is actually should be the owner of that approach, how it should start, what is the conversation in the boardroom when it comes to human risk. It takes only one man to crash the entire business. So what is the best way to start it? But we could talk hours, so I'll save some talks for the next session. We will that session is recorded, and that will be uploaded to our website, and we will send you a link also, Mo. And we are looking forward to catch up with you later on the next episode
Excellent.
of Top
Thanks,
Secret.
guys.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
much
Have a good
appreciated.
day. Take care, guys.
That's
Bye-bye.
right.
Take care.